Welcome to the Open-Hearted Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open-Hearted Podcast. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, joined by my main man, Photon John. Kev, what's going on, brother?
Just working through the day, taking a quick break to do this.
Taking a quick break, a nice hour break, right?
Yeah.
Nice,
little Husky started rehearsing a new set for the tour, so
nice, man. Nice, getting ready for a big tour, yeah?
Yeah, like 20-something dates all up and down the country.
20-something days, mate. Awesome. How's the heat holding up where you are?
It's absolutely awful. I want to die.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's not supposed to be this hot this far into autumn.
True. Well, it's funny because I've got my parents down from Brisbane to Sydney today, and it's going to be like one of the hottest weekends on record. It's not even summer anymore. So crazy stuff. But talking about like crazy, I suppose, weather, our guest today is probably in the opposite to what we are. So what we're actually going to be covering today is, and I better have a quick look, we're going to be covering a deep dive into neurodistinct imposter syndrome with Dr. Matt. So I might bring him up on the stage. Dr. Matt, how's it going, my man? Awesome to see you.
Awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, not a problem. Like we were talking about before we jumped on the podcast there before, just this crazy weather. You would think it's starting to warm up over your way. We were thinking it was starting to cool off down here. That was why I invited my parents down here at this time, because I was like, holy crap, let's come down when it's cooler, right? Because you've lived in Sydney. It's actually not too bad when it's quite cool here, right?
It's gorgeous. I mean, we flew down in July 2024, and I'm not saying I needed a coat, but I was like, okay, a long sleeve t-shirt. When I left, it was December, and it was 36 degrees in Sydney. And don't ask me what that means in Fahrenheit because I don't remember, but I know it was hot.
I think that's pushing towards 100. I think 40 degrees here is close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
So very hot. So we fly from Sydney to Los Angeles to here in New Jersey. And when we landed here in New Jersey, it was 10 degrees Fahrenheit and sleeting. And they had to pull me off the plane. I was like, no, don't send me back. Because I didn't have any winter clothes. I had been gone for 6 months. And, that was a very rude welcome back to the United States.
Wow, crazy. You know what? I remember when I was living overseas, I went from winter straight back into the middle of summer. That is not fun. You know what I mean? But fun times ahead.
I mean, Australian hot is hot.
Yeah, man. Hell yeah. And you cannot prepare for that. But what we might do before we quickly get into the podcast, I might just do some housekeeping in regards to where people can find us. So if you're listening and you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. You can see us up the top there. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch now, YouTube, LinkedIn. And also, too, we've also now got our website. So if you go to the openheartedsociety.com website there, please subscribe where you can get all of our cool content, our podcasts, lots of cool stuff happening with that shortly. But enough about that. We really got to come here for the main man today, who we're all waiting for, Dr. Matt. Actually, we were talking about this before. Dr. Matt, how do you pronounce your last name, my man?
Zakreski.
Yeah. Dr. Matt Zakreski.
Hey, there you go. Top notch.
Yeah, there you go. Do you know what, right? I don't know if it could be just a me thing. I don't know. But sometimes I could practice getting someone's name right. But when it comes to actually doing it without being assisted, I always stuff it up. You know what I mean? But anyway, we'll get into it. But before anything, look, tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, you're doing some really great work. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, so I am a twice exceptional adult. I was identified gifted in second grade here in the US and then diagnosed with ADHD in high school. And like a lot of twice exceptional people, my giftedness masked a lot of the things about ADHD, you know, and sort of taught me this idea of like, well, can't I just think my way through it? And the older I got and the higher the demands got, the more I realized that no, I could not, you know, and there's a sort of a rude awakening that can come with that if you're not careful. And, you know, I often say I ground a lot of the work I do in that I was so lucky. Both of my parents are psychologists. They trained under people who knew giftedness. They knew what to look for. They had the skills. You know, not very few people are that lucky. So I always said to my folks, like, if I get to do what you do, I want to work with people like me because being smart isn't easy. And this was in the 90s. We didn't have words like twice exceptional or masking or neurodivergent. I mean, it was just, oh, you're weird. You're broken. You know, I can't tell you how many times in school I heard, you're so smart. If only you could get your ADHD under control. And every time it was like, you know, like, so I
don't know if you went through the same thing. Like I had a lot of people come up to me because like I was saying before, I'm twice exceptional myself, right? And it was strange growing up because for me, in my brain, I felt really intelligent and smart, but then there was all these other things going on where I just couldn't do it. And I'd be getting knocked down and being made to feel stupid. But then in my brain, I'm thinking, I don't feel like this at all. And I would do other things where my strengths were, and I was blitzing it. Did you ever go through similar stuff like that yourself?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the wars we fight up here, right? I mean, just the amount of, you know, comments you hear and things that sort of stick with you. I mean, I remember being in grade 8 and having a teacher say, you know, for someone who is as capable as much as you are, it hurts that much more to watch you slack off. And I'm like, I thought I did a good job, you know, because the content I presented was great, but like a true ADHD person, I forgot the little nitty gritty pieces that, you know, it had to be in a certain font. It had to have a staple on the upper left-hand side. I didn't pay attention to any of that crap. I just wrote a really good paper. And, you know, so I got a B-, and, you know, I got an 80 out of 100, not because what I wrote was bad, but because I didn't follow these arbitrary rules. And, you know, I mean, and, you know, the fact is I'm 39 years old. I turned 40 in October, and I still can remember that. There's something very wrong with the way we
it's so funny you say that because, and I think this is such a big thing where, you know, especially with young students in school, is that the experience there can play lifelong. What's the word I'm looking for? But like it can carry on later on in life. Like, don't get me wrong. You could probably even say that I'm still struggling with a lot of trauma from how certain teachers made me feel because of certain things and all of this type of stuff. So, you know, I think this is where, you know, in schools, teachers should be mindful of some of the things they're saying to these kids.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a touring musician with some level of success. And, you know, and when I was like 14, 15 in school, I remember music class specifically because that was my budding years as a musician. And I would walk into the soundproof room with my friends and then perfectly mimic an 11-minute long, you know, psychedelic rock track on guitar and vocals, then sit down at my desk and fail music repeatedly. Because I wasn't meeting these little requirements. But then, you know, I remember there was one module, I think we've spoken about it before on the podcast, but you know, where we had to write a song, and the teacher refused to believe that I wrote it. But eventually, once my mum came up to school, I got like an A+ in that, and it was similar with art as well because I was very into art. But it was like express yourself within these certain predefined parameters, and I couldn't get the parameters right. So they really weren't accommodating for the way that because clearly they were based on certain parts of how I was doing in those subjects. I could excel. They just weren't coming at me in the right way.
But you know what, right? Today we're talking about imposter syndrome. And you're the expert here, Dr. Matt, but I'm assuming that this would be why later on in life we are struggling with these types of things, especially around imposter syndrome.
Oh, completely. And to go to what Photon John, what you were saying, I mean, the ability to do something and make it look easy is the perfect breeding ground for imposter syndrome. Because, I mean, I've dabbled in music a bit myself. I played drums for many years, and I can't sing a note, right? You don't want me even in the chorus, right? But if you give me a drum kit, I'm going to be able to figure out what you're doing and be a competent drummer, right? If my life had taken me in a different direction, I probably could have been a studio drummer, right? I mean, like, I'm never going to be Ringo, but I'm perfectly competent. But I can tell you that the easier drumming got for me, the more I felt like a fraud, because, I couldn't articulate to anybody why I could do it. I could just do it. So I saw people grinding, and I saw people taking classes and talking about music theory, and people who could sing notes and understood music. And I just said, beat goes like this. And I just kept doing that until they told me to do something different. And it was, so that's actually the background of my computer, is that the intersection of making something look easy and not giving yourself credit for it is where imposter syndrome comes from. And when you do as much as I do, with the various jobs I have, I open myself up to feeling like a fraud a lot, because I get to do a lot of podcasts and I get to do a lot of talks and I get to see a lot of people for therapy and I get to write a lot of things. And every time I do, there's that part of my brain that's like, if you were really good at this, you'd be doing it this way. And it's like, oh, I hate that voice. But, at this point, I've learned to live with it.
It's so interesting you say that, because even for myself, like I do a lot of stuff in the educational space. I'm talking like adult education. And, I'm getting a lot of people reaching out to me now going, hey, we're interested in what you're doing here. And I'm a professional in that field, but sometimes I'm thinking, okay, what if I stuff up, or am I really this? Am I really that? But what I'm actually learning is I actually know a hell of a lot more than what other people do. So I think it is those voices in my head really just knocking me down from years of, just being told you're not meeting that certain standard. So before we go on, we've actually had a few people comment through. So I might share some of this stuff just because I think it's cool when people come through. Now, is that Annie? Is it Annie? Am I pronouncing it correct? Yeah, cool. I don't. Crowy? Is that? Yeah. Okay, sweet. I'm dyslexic, everyone. So, okay, now I got comments from teachers like, "You're not reaching your potential. Try harder. I know you can. We've got so much potential. Smart but consistent. Procrastinate too much, etc., etc." And I think another thing she shared before as well. I got through law school with zero effort, then entered the legal profession, and through someone is going to figure you out, you're a fraud. Yeah, I've definitely felt that sometimes too, especially working in like the neurodiversity space as well. I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but sometimes I think, oh, I'm not this. Am I a fraud type of thing? But I think I'm starting to learn that your own experience is valuable within itself as well. Sorry, we've just got one other person who's just reached out as well. I'm sorry, I just can't pronounce your name there. I'm so sorry. I am a researcher and I read a lot, but still feel like an imposter. So these people messaging through are very highly skilled people. And you know what? I think it's really cool hearing from these people, because there's probably a lot of people listening who are maybe working and building up those careers who may not maybe feeling that type of thing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, so what we might do on the next part here. So you've spoken a little bit about your journey. So what are some of your qualifications, and what is that, you know, your diagnosis? When were you diagnosed? How has that journey been for yourself, Dr. Matt?
It's been hard. You know, I mean, I mentioned before, right? I don't feel like when I was a kid, we had the word masking, right? I don't think it was a term I understood. You know, and growing up as a straight white guy in the suburbs in the 90s, you know, you did sports. It was sports. You did sports. You talked about sports. You watched sports. You played sports. You did sports. And don't get me wrong, I love sports. But I just remember thinking I was always holding myself back. You know, I was always, you know, people would walk out of a test and be like, oh, man, that was so brutal. And they'd look at me and be like, yeah, those things. You know, I would finish a test in 7 minutes and sit there flipping the papers back and forth, buying time until somebody else turned in the test. Then I could go turn in the test. And, you know, and at the end of the day, you know, maybe those things are not the end of the world, but every single one of those choices took energy, took time away from the things I'm trying to do, you know. And it wasn't until I went to my first gifted camp that I realized that there were people out there who were just as smart as me, who thought like me, who cared like me. And that was probably the single most personally important moment of my life. You know, I mean, this idea of like, you know, I said a smart thing and at school, everyone would smile and nod, but at this camp, so it was like, oh, that's a really good point. But what about this thing? I'm like, oh, you do like I do. You know, and all of a sudden, right, we were, you know, going back and forth discussing economic theory, you know, like 12-year-olds do. You know, but just, it's hard to tell that story without a smile on my face, because that's the stuff, that's the magic, you know. And I mean, for all of its ills, thank God for the internet, because we can connect across 12,000 miles or God knows how many kilometers. I'm not going to do that math.
But you know what, it's so true, because I think the biggest thing and I've said this so many times, is that I felt so lonely, not lonely as in like I had no friends, but lonely at school, that I was the only one who was dyslexic. I was the only, well, at that point I didn't know I was ADHD. And it wasn't until I had, you know, left school and started, and like you spoke about, the internet and that, now I'm connected with people all over the world who share a similar experience. And I'm like, you know, Dr. Matt, this is really the first time we've ever really spoke.
Yeah.
But, you know, I feel like I already know you well, man. I could sit down. I don't know if you drink or anything. But I feel like I could sit down and have a beer with you or whatever. And we'd hit it off like we've been mates for years. You know what I mean?
Well, bring me a Carlton Cold and we'll be good, right?
Like Carlton Dry or Carlton Draft?
Oh, I mean,
the drafts are a bit like, so for anyone listening, Carlton is like an Australian beer, and there's very many different types of beers. And sometimes here in Australia, depending on what one you drink, it's almost like a social thing. People may sort of cast you aside for drinking the wrong type. So
it's kind of like football teams in England.
It is crazy stuff there. But really, you know, getting into this, you know, I think for people listening, you know, we've touched base on a little bit, but what is imposter syndrome, and what are the types of that as well?
So imposter syndrome is it's an internal phenomenon where you doubt your accomplishments and have this persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. So to have true imposter syndrome, you got to have both, right? And so famously it was identified in the 1980s here in the US with women on Wall Street. So Wall Street's the, economic center of the United States. And in the 80s, the first few women were just getting these high level jobs, right? And they're making a bunch of money. And so these psychologists are like, oh, we're going to study them. We're going to see what makes them tick. And they realized that these women were successful. They were well liked. They were well respected, but they were miserable. And one woman said, every day, every Friday, I pack up my stuff into a cardboard box and I sit by the door to my office waiting for somebody to come and get me and drag me out of there. And, so they were developing ulcers and their hair was falling out. I mean, it was a very anxiety-racking, traumatic experience. And what they realized is that being the one of 6 women in giant companies full of men, they were made so aware of their difference, right? They were made both in objective ways, but also in some subtle ways. Like they had to go down a floor to go to the women's bathroom, like the little things. So imposter syndrome comes from this sense of I am different than everybody else. And that difference can be made explicit or implicit, but that difference can make us think, because I'm not like everybody else, there's something fundamentally flawed about me. Ergo, I am a fraud. And that stuff can become very insidious if you're not careful.
And is it?
I definitely.
To what degree would it be? Say, what ratio would it be of potentially, say, societal projections on a person, on what they think, the perfect idea of a person in that position is, and internal dialogue, building up your own sort of unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, and I mean I love that you're asking that question, because that's exactly what that is. And some of this stuff is something that a person hasn't thought of ever, right? You just have this baked in idea because you're from society, and you think, for instance, a gifted person looks like X, right? People have this idea, the gifted people, they sit there with the uniforms, right? And then, they sit there and they raise their hand and they answer the questions, and they're like co-teachers. And there are gifted kids like that. But the more neurodivergent and neurodistinct you are, the less likely you are to be that person. So if you're going against this preconceived notion of what a gifted person, quote unquote, is, right, then you've already stepped into that imposter syndrome. And if there are things that are overt about you, like, for instance, like, say you're a native Australian, or you have a physical disability, or you have tics, right? All of a sudden, these things that are made explicit and apparent serve to fuel the fire of imposter syndrome, because it's like, I'm not like everybody else. There must be something fundamentally wrong with me being here, right? And it erodes all the good stuff out from underneath you.
Wow, crazy. Building on from that, I think when we were doing some research, so is there different types as well, is there? Did you already cover that, or?
We're getting to it.
Okay, sorry.
Well, so imposter syndrome, it manifests very different for different people. If you think about it in terms of anxiety, right? Anxiety causes us to either fight or run towards the problem, flight, run away from the problem, or freeze, right? Because I can't decide what to do, right? Your imposter syndrome might manifest in one of those 3 ways, right? Some people, like, I got a sales job in international travel right out of university, and I was sure that they had hired the wrong guy, so I worked my butt off. So in that case, my imposter syndrome drove me towards the problem, and I made the most phone calls, and I sent the most emails, and I made a lot of money for me and the company. There are times my imposter syndrome, like, for instance, trying to write a book, is like, I should do it, but I can't. 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 That's the freeze move, right? I can't. I have a book in me. I just can't take that next step. And then it's stuff like, oh, you should, you're really good at this. You should have your own podcast. And I run for the hills on that one. Exit stage left. You'll find me hiding behind Uluru. It's not a thing that I can marshal my anxiety about. But all 3 of those versions show this idea that like whatever successes you have or are capable of feel fraudulent because there's something in your brain telling you, nah, man, that's not your journey. That's not a thing you get. And what you'll find with any exploration is that's not true, right? Anybody is capable of anything, but sometimes we become our own biggest barriers to getting there.
It's funny you say that because I actually have written a book, and I think the first thing was, and it's funny you say that, for a long time I sat there going, you know what, I really want to write a book. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why don't you just start? And then one day I just went, well, because I would then read about how to write a book. I would watch YouTubes about how to write a book. And I'm thinking, why don't I just start writing a book? I didn't know how. I had no idea. So I just started writing stuff. But it was interesting because I found that once I had broken that barrier, I had felt like I could then move forward to other things. So is it would you sort of say that like, yeah, you do have these barriers there, but once they're broken, that sort of can help with your imposter syndrome? Or does that just move to another area of it?
So depending on the amount of support one gets, both of those things can happen. The very first time I got to give a talk in front of a bunch of people, I was nervous and shaking and thinking somebody's going to come up here that can grab me, get me out of there, right? And when that didn't happen, I had this flash of moment where I thought to myself, you know what? All I can do is do the best damn job I can. And if the fraud police show up and take me out of here, then that's what they're going to do. I can't stop that from happening. But I did the talk. It was great. People clapped. I said, okay, I'm on to something here. And I often say that if I ever stop feeling a little bit anxious when I'm giving a talk, I'm going to stop giving talks, because the right amount of anxiety can motivate us to do better, right? It shows that we care. The question, but if the imposter syndrome's really got its hooks in you, then it's you can't even raise your hand to be somebody who could give a talk. You couldn't even watch the YouTube video to be somebody who could write a book, because it's just, I'm so much a fraud. I couldn't even begin that journey. And so many dreams die on the launch pad because of these messages that we get externally and internally about our worthiness to even be there in the first place.
Yeah. I know that feeling kept me from full potential with live performance for years. And it wasn't until I had a very similar realization. I won't quote the proverb or whatever it is, because not the biblical proverb, but it's an old Chinese thing, I think, but the man realizes that, the thing hasn't happened yet. So why, right now you're just here, and none of that matters because that's not here yet. So yeah, whatever, essentially anxiety is a fear of potential future outcomes, right? And that once that went away, the full potential got unleashed, and I stopped caring, and it was all about enjoyment of doing what I already loved doing, and was stopping myself from loving doing. If that makes sense.
You know what was funny? It's funny you're talking about getting and doing when you first were doing presentations and all that. And I remember when I had to do my first sort of presentation in the neurodiversity space. And I don't know, have you ever heard of like a professor called Professor Tony Atwood? He does a lot of work, in autism. And the thing was, right, I was sharing a stage with him. He got up and presented all that. And this dude's like, so for those of you who don't know who this guy is like, he is really well known. He's like a big name dude, right?
Oh, God.
Yeah, totally, right? And like, for one, this was my first ever presentation around neurodiversity, and I'm sharing the stage with that guy, right? And like, and my presentation wasn't until the afternoon. He went off first, right? Because I think it was, he wanted to, But when you're him, you can dictate what time you want to talk, you know what I mean? And that was cool with me. But I remember sitting there watching, and there's this whole room there for him, right? And I'm thinking, I just went straight into adrenaline from 10 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon when my presentation was on. I'd never had been rushing with so much adrenaline in my life. I was just like, you know, I was like I was a drug addict, like off my face, like, oh my God, and it was a, you know, it wasn't like, you know, say if you're in a band, you could probably have a few beers to calm yourself down. This was like a professional event. You can't sit there like having a few beers and getting drunk so you can calm down.
That's the after party.
Yeah, totally. But you know what, right? I remember I got to my time and I got up and did my presentation. And you know what the hardest thing was? He was sitting in the front row right in front of me while I was talking. I'm thinking, oh my God. But you know what I learned from that was that, for one, I was sharing my experience, my lived experience and all that, which was something completely different to what he was doing. And I then learned that, you know what, I am pretty good because I've got a whole different experience to what he does anyway. And that's and then people afterwards were coming up to me going, man, unbelievable presentation. I love this and this and this. And I was just like, you know what? And that was pretty hard for your first sort of gig, right? After that, I feel a lot more relaxed these days because I'm like, you know what? I've actually got a lot of lived experience there, what a lot of other people don't know about, which is gold to be able to share with people. So that was, I definitely know what you're speaking about in regards to that. All right. Sorry, I've just had a few people come through here. But, you know, we've been speaking about, you know, what it is and all that. But how does this relate to, you know, neurodiversity and people? Because obviously, you know, probably not just neurodistinct people struggle with imposter syndrome, but how can this really relate to the neurodiversity community?
Yeah. So it impacts the neurodiversity community in three ways. You know, given that I think this is going to be the series of many podcast conversations that we have, and you know, when you come to New York, you can stay with us, right? Because we're mates now. So I mean,
hell yeah, man! I'll take you up on that offer, man. Hell yeah.
I might rock up with 4 band members one day.
Yeah, you've got the drum kit, right?
Sit on drums. That's the price of admission, right? I mean, yeah.
Totally.
You can give me a conga and I'll sit in the corner. I'll be very well behaved. But you know, I think in threes, right? So that's you know, so the first is one's neurodivergence, especially if it is non-diagnosed or not accepted, becomes that internal sense of difference. I don't fit because I'm not like everybody else, right? So that's the first way, because many of us are carrying around these divergences or these distinctions and either not knowing or not having our environments get it really or understand it. So that's part one. Second thing is what we call the imposter cycle. So you get a task to do, right? You have to speak at a conference, you have to write a paper, you have to cook dinner for your significant other. That causes a certain amount of anxiety. That anxiety shows up in either over preparation, I did way too much, or under preparation, I push it off, put it off, and I ended up got some meat pies at the last minute and acted like I cooked them, right? Like, good job. And so, but because you're very capable, because you're an intelligent person, you're successful. You do a good job. And everyone's like, wow, look at Will. He did really good here, right? And they give you praise, but because you know what your journey was and how full of holes it was, you can't accept that compliment. So you, instead of getting the positive reinforcement, you push the compliments away. You just feel lucky. So the single biggest distinction, right, for regular anxiety versus imposter syndrome is you finish a thing. Do you feel good about it, or do you feel lucky it's done? If you feel lucky it's done, you probably have imposter syndrome. And because neurodivergent people's paths are atypical for how school and work ask you to operate, we are beset by stuff like that. Because everyone's like, oh, there's a test in a week. I studied every night and I did a few pages every night to study for the test. And I did the study and I got a 91 and I feel good about that. The neurodivergent person's like, I read every book in the text 17 times. Or we had a test today, flip, 7. Because you didn't do it like everybody else. Yeah, it's right. Those seeds are planted. And then the last piece of this that, really, I think what I see increasingly from people is the trapdoor of of imposter syndrome, especially for neurodivergent people, is I've never really failed or been challenged before. So I'm sort of floating around on this, like, yeah, I must be good, but like, when does the other shoe drop? And then you hit that first failure. You get cut from the band. You don't get a good grade. You don't get the part in the play. You don't make the first team for the soccer team. Like, I mean, whatever that thing is. And then it's the trapdoor opens and it all comes crumbling down because there's this idea like, well, how good could I have been if it's fallen apart now, right? Because neurodivergent people tend to fuse with the things they're good at because they care so much. So it's not just you're a footballer. It's like, I am a footballer, right? I'm not just smart. I am a gifted kid. The intensity there fuses us to those thoughts. So a wound to that area of performance is a wound to the self. So it hurts us twice.
Wow, crazy. Sorry, you go, Kev.
Do you find that time can, the benefit of a longer, I guess, data set on your own life can sometimes help with that? I find I've had my business for 8 years now, and I spent, it's not like I don't walk into a boardroom with CEOs and feel like a complete fraud, but having had the business for 8 years now, I've certainly lost that idea that I don't belong in the industry or that I can't do what I do. But I don't know if that's just an age thing or a gradual building of confidence. Do you find that time does tend to help this, or can people just
sorry to cut you off there. I'm just going to quickly check if my air conditioning is on. Okay. So if you want to answer that while I'm away, I'll be back in 2 secs. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or is it like multiple factors that can help towards healing some of that? The
first thing we do to heal imposter syndrome is to name it, is to know what it is. I often say that, I give lots of different kinds of talks, but the one that always makes people cry is this one, because they didn't know they didn't know that they didn't have to feel this way. Right. I cannot tell you, Kev, like how many times people have started sobbing during this talk because they're like, I didn't know this was a way other people didn't feel. And it just it breaks my heart. Right. But once you know imposter syndrome is a thing, then you've got a word for how you're feeling. And we have a word for how you're feeling. You can externalize it from your brain. So it's this idea of it's not just, oh, I can't go to this audition because I'm a fraud. It's I can't go to this audition because my imposter syndrome is telling me I'm a fraud. And then now you're not fighting yourself, you're fighting your imposter syndrome. And maybe you get a workaround there. It's like, okay, well, listen, I already don't have the gig. I might as well show up. And if I don't get it, well, nothing's changed. But if I do get it, well, that's an opportunity for me to play what you said is a 20 city tour. Yeah. Right. So, that thing that you've accomplished doesn't come from nowhere. You didn't just blip into that band, right? Stole somebody's identity. Right? True. You earned it. And if you can see that as a developmental process towards that goal, then all of a sudden you're giving yourself more credit for all the things that have happened to you, good, bad, and indifferent.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So how does your work tie in with this? Like what research is there around, imposter syndrome, and what have you done in relation to that?
thankfully there's a lot of research about this, and there's, and we're lucky because there's a lot of smart people who are talking about this, and there are a lot of smart people who are coming up with ways to manage this and to help people overcome it or live with it. And it's wonderful because it's no way to live, right? It's no way to live to be this miserable in yourself, in your own brain. I always joke with my clients. It's like, listen, life is hard enough. Like, don't join the people who are out to get you, right? Like, trust me, there's plenty of people out there who would happily slap you down. Don't join their side. Be on your own side. So, and as we get better at understanding the right kinds of therapy practices for neurodivergent people, the more we are able to customize therapy for the experience of imposter syndrome and for the experience of imposter syndrome that is unique to neurodivergent or neurodistinct people.
Cool.
Yeah, crazy. So obviously, if we're talking about neurodistinct people, what would be the best way to deal with it then? So, what should I do? Is it just me? You're the doctor, mate. You let us know. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so the first we already covered the first part. You learn what imposter syndrome is so you can name it. So that's the big step. If you take nothing else away from today, take that. The second thing we're going to do is it's actually sort of a little bit of a hack. So I mentioned before, right? When you do a thing with imposter syndrome, you feel lucky, you feel relieved, you don't feel good. So the way we hack this is that when you do a thing that's hard, that triggers your imposter syndrome, because now you know what imposter syndrome is, you give yourself a reward to enforce that part of the reinforcement cycle. So, for instance, when I'm done talking to you guys, I'm going to go upstairs and have a cookie. I literally have it upstairs. It's on a plate. It's waiting for me. I'm going to have a cookie because even though I've talked about imposter syndrome 50 times now, it still twings that for me.
Wow,
so
crazy.
Instead of getting that oh, thank God they didn't catch me, it's the, okay, oh wait, cookie. No. Now I just gave my brain a little bit of dopamine, and my dopamine goes, oh, that talk was pretty solid, huh? And I'm like, I don't know if it was the talk or the cookie, but I feel better.
So, would you say that's sort of similar to post-traumatic stress disorder as well?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
So interestingly, right? Traumatic experiences are experienced throughout the whole body, right? It's not just a brain thing, it's a whole body thing. So the preeminent book on trauma, right? The body keeps the score. When you're a neurodivergent person, your brain is more interconnected. The limbic system of feelings is more wired. This becomes important because you're going to have bigger responses to any stressor, but particularly imposter syndrome. So if a neurotypical person who has imposter syndrome, which they certainly can have it as well, right? They might feel that feeling of anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10 at a 9. That's a big feeling of anxiety. A neurodivergent person, though, is going to feel that at a 13, 14, right? It's bigger. So, crazy. And because there are fewer spaces set up for us in society, if you can't stick in that space because of your imposter syndrome, you might fall further faster. So it's a higher stakes intervention because we're going to feel that stuff bigger because of our neurodivergence, right? There's it's a whole body experience, which is why, intervening in this becomes about not just the skills we have up here, but also the environments we tend to trot in, So Kev, if you think about it this way, right? Being a talented musician, I'm sure there are many bands you could play with, right? But I'm going to guess, and I don't know the answer to this, so please tell me if I'm wrong. I'm going to guess that you're sticking with the band you're in right now because of how they make you feel, because of how you guys work together. Yeah. Right? Environment matters so much, right? And, I always tell people as a therapist, like, I get you 1 hour a week, maybe. I want to push bigger returns on investment for interventions. So changing a school for a kid can thwart the imposter syndrome because now you're in an environment that normalizes it, or that everybody's struggling with it. Or changing the workplace for an adult. Like, hey, you're in the wrong kind of law for somebody with your brain. So if you move from contract law, which is very like nitty gritty and every word matters, to like, or like broad scopes, like, you know, employment law, trying to talk about like culture, now you're in something that's going to fit your vibe better, and your imposter syndrome may never go away, but it's going to get quieter, right? And that's the sort of thing that really matters. So, you know, the environmental intervention piece of this is how we deal with the whole body part of this, well, which that you brought up from before.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's really interesting. Just what I might actually do is just do a shout out to, if anyone, because there are a few people listening. Does anyone have any questions they wanted to throw at Dr. Matt, or not throw, gently send through to Dr. Matt? Because, you know, you're covering some really cool stuff there. There may be some stuff, and sometimes it does take a little bit to come through. So we might move on there. Kev, did you have anything you wanted to ask Dr. Matt there at all, or
I've been pondering while you've been speaking about imposter syndromeception. So I kind of have gotten to a point with what I do for work and with as a vocalist with my band, where I don't have that imposter syndrome anymore because I've been doing it for so long and achieving a certain amount of success. But now I have imposter syndrome about not having imposter syndrome, if that makes sense. I feel confident, but I feel weird about being confident. But it's not the same old imposter syndrome that I used to have. Is that a common thing?
Very common thing. And that commonality that you're experiencing is how we have to conceptualize these things as sort of lifelong journeys, right? Like, it's not a video game. You don't vanquish your imposter syndrome and you beat the game and you just put that game away, do another game. And anxiety is sneaky. It's going to show back up, right? But what we do when we think about imposter syndrome is we talk about what we call in psychology the big three, right? Frequency, intensity, and duration, right? How often something happens, how intense it is, and how long it lasts. So it's showing up for you in different ways. If you're not careful, that's going to feel as a failure. It's going to feel like, oh, thought I had it, but now it's back. No, it's like, hold on a second. I went 8 months without feeling imposter syndrome. From a frequency perspective, that's awesome. That's like, whoa, hey, 8, like, you know, I mean, imagine if like you were trying not to get into fist fights with your brother. If you didn't get in a fist fight with your brother for 8 months, that's pretty damn good, right? That's awesome. Like, we want, and just because you got into one doesn't undo the progress you made before. It's you know, it's an event, it's a moment. So you can see, like, what am I doing right now? What circles am I in? What circles am I leaving? That might twing these feelings, right? That bring this up. Because when you see it as a response to environment, then once again we're externalizing the problem from, oh, you're still a fraud, you're still a failure, to, what about this new experience I'm having is bringing up those feelings for me. We move from self-blame to curiosity. Curiosity gives us the tools to perhaps solve the problem.
It's interesting you say, right? Because just while you're talking, I was thinking about it. And obviously, when someone has a career, their goal is to build their career and become better and all of that type of stuff. And I guess what I'm finding is in my career, that's happening. But now I'm going into bigger, you know, probably more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like more, getting more respected, and also being around. When I say bigger people, I don't mean big like large. I mean like very well-known people. It's like, whoa, you know, I'm starting to get up here. And that's starting to kick in a lot. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm like, man, I'm speaking to this person who's really well known and all of those types of things. And I'm assuming that's similar type of thing to what you're talking about.
God, yes. And this is a really wonderful thing for everyone to take away from this. It's like, the one thing I've learned about imposter syndrome is that all the cool, smart people who you think have their shit together have imposter syndrome. Right? The very first time I gave my imposter syndrome talk, I'm at this conference out in Seattle, Washington. I am, terrified as per usual. And Susan Daniels, who's a giant in our field, is sitting in the front row, sort of like what you're saying about Tony Abbott, right? And so at one point, I'm explaining a point about imposter syndrome, and Sue goes, "Oh my God, that's me!" And I went, "You can't have imposter syndrome. You're Susan Daniels." Oh, I just proved my own point.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. So I tell the story all the time, and I always give her credit. He's wonderful. But that's really it. It's like, you go into a room full of smart, capable people, and you say, "Hey, who in here has ever felt like a fraud?" I'll tell you this: 90% of that room's gonna raise their hands. And because one of the things we know about gifted people and twice exceptional people is that they give a shit. And part of giving a shit means that you're opening yourself up to imposter syndrome, right? Like, I don't feel like a fraud as a homeowner because a home is just a place where I live. I can feel like a fraud as a psychologist, as a speaker, as a father. Like, holy shit, taking my kids out in public, it's like, they're watching me, like, because I care about it, right? Yeah. But I would rather give you the skills to manage imposter syndrome than to tell you not to care, because caring is what makes us who we are.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, now my career is really starting to really take off. I am being around certain people who have quite successful companies and stuff like that. And they say the exact same thing. They're like, "Yeah, man, I went through imposter syndrome, the exact same thing." And it's sort of like, and it is good to hear that. Like, you're talking about, sorry, was it Danielle? You were saying she was in the front row of one of your talks?
Susan Daniels.
Susan Daniels. And when you hear that from people, especially at those levels, I think that's actually really good to hear, because then I know for myself, I've been able to go, "Oh, I'm not the only one then." Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because like I said, like when I was back in school being dyslexic and that, I felt like I was the only one. So hearing people speak about that stuff is just like, wow, crazy, But in saying this, in regards to questions, we've actually had a few people come through. We've got Cara Lambert.
One of my favorite people.
Hi, Cara. This is one of your friends?
Cara follows me on the Facebook, and simultaneously gives me excellent comments and feedback, and also calls me out if I say something wrong, which is exactly the kind of content I'm looking for. So, Cara,
totally.
You are much appreciated.
Totally. Would you like to? Can you? So, I'll read out a question just so our listeners can hear. Would love to hear Dr. Matt's thoughts on a trend I'm seeing that imposter syndrome isn't real, and we are. How do you pronounce it? Okay, pathologic. I don't know. Can't even pronounce it. Pathologizing a fad. All right, cool. Lucky this is a neurodiversity podcast, so no one cares if I stuff up, hey?
So, I'll tell you this. Imposter syndrome is real, and it's not in the DSM, so I can't formally diagnose you with it as a psychologist. But when you think about the experience one has about trying to play in systems that were not built for you, you are made so aware of your difference. So one way to think about it this way is, do you know that left-handed people report higher instances of anxiety and depression?
Well, that's interesting because I am left-handed and I do struggle with that.
Because the systems that are built are subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, built for right-handed people. like notebooks, like where door handles are. It's built for right-handed people. So lefties are made aware of their difference 1,000 times a day in lots of little ways. You walk into any classroom, right? If you're a lefty, the first thing you got to do is look where the left-handed desks are, right? And maybe there's only 3 of them. That restricts where you can sit. Maybe the left-handed desk is broken and it's a part of the room where you can't see. Maybe your mates are all sitting over there, but you got to sit over there because you're left-handed. All of a sudden, these things are getting in the way. And the problem is that the dominant paradigms of people, of neurotypicals or righties, they have a vested interest in calling it a fad or a fraudulent thing, because it is potentially upsetting the dynamics that maintain the power. So, this was where I sounded like a little bit like I have the tinfoil hat on. Yeah,
I think it's the best analogy I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. But what about if you're ambidextrous? Because I'm ambidextrous. So I've sort of like do some stuff that's left-handed, but then I think over time I've just been able to go, well, I do it this way as well. Could this be a thing where I've had to go, my brain is adapted or something like that, do you reckon?
I remember reading a study a while ago, and I'm going to, of course, forget where I read it, but the rates of ambidextrousness in gifted and twice exceptional people are something like 300% higher than neurotypicals. There's I think it's just all those connections in our brain. Sometimes that manifests in ambidextrosity. Now, I am so right-hand dominant. My left hand might as well not even be here, but it holds my wedding ring. It does a good job.
That's the main thing.
But if we think about the idea of imposter syndrome, I think a lot of the reasons that people are going to push back against it, right, is that they think it's just about anxiety. They're like, everybody feels anxious sometimes. Well, no shit, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a feeling that someone is going to come and drag you out of this space by your ear. I can't tell you how many sleepless nights I had writing my dissertation because I was sure that somebody was going to kick in the door to my apartment and be like, somebody already wrote that. Somebody already thought of that idea. You don't get to do this anymore. I'm like, no, right? I mean, it can be so debilitating. And to me, another way to think about it, right? Do either of you guys get migraines?
No,
I've had
not
one.
really.
I've had one ever and then never again.
Right. So then, Kev, I'll focus on you for this.
Yeah.
Is a migraine like a regular headache?
No.
Right.
I went blind. Blind in one eye.
Blind in one eye, right? I get the blindness too.
Crap.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the sort of thing. It's like saying that, oh, imposter syndrome isn't really a thing because everybody gets anxious. That's like saying migraines aren't real because everybody gets headaches. They are a quantifiably different thing. I had been stung by jellyfish living here in the Atlantic Ocean. When I lived in Australia, I got stung by a blue bottle. Let me tell you, that was the migraine of jellyfish stings. I felt like somebody set my arm on fire. Right.
Wow.
So,
I hope you didn't get someone to whereabouts did you get stung on your arm? Was it? Did someone, because this is, I don't know if it's real, but they say if you get stung, someone should urinate on this thing, right?
Regular vinegar works just fine.
That's probably a good thing to know.
I don't tend to carry vinegar with me at the beach, though.
Yeah, just in case, right?
My grandma did because she's English, so she has her fish and chips with vinegar. But yeah, I'm seeing a bit of conversation here around. And there's a question from Annie as well, but around early intervention. But yeah, why don't we get to Annie's question first?
Yeah, we've got a lot of people coming through, and we might not be able to take all the questions because we don't have all day. But so, Dr. Mab, what are some practical tools you give to 2E clients to help with their imposter syndrome?
So, the big thing here is thinking about what we call bottom-up thinking versus top-down thinking. The more stressed and anxious we are, the more we are likely to do top-down thinking. Top-down thinking assumes that we have to do it perfect. and anything less than that is bad. It is proof that we are a failure, right? If you have to get 100% on a test and you get a 95 on a test, the first thing you do is you say, oh, I got one wrong. I got 5 points off, right? That kind of thinking fuels your imposter syndrome because it's saying, hey, you thought you could do it this way, but you didn't, therefore you're bad. I always tell my clients, you got to bottom up thinking. If you're trying to walk up a flight of stairs, you got to start at the bottom of the stairs. So whether you take 1 step today or 19 steps today, you have walked up the ladder. So to go back to this example of getting a 95 on a test, you can say you got one wrong, or you knew 95% of the material. Like which one sounds better, right? It's the same data set. It's just changing the way we feel about it. Because the imposter says, if you don't get it, that's proof you're a fraud. The bottom-up thinker says, look how fortunate I was to have these opportunities and move this far along. Maybe it didn't go the way I wanted. Maybe I didn't get the job, the gig, the talk, the book contract, whatever. But even to be considered is kind of proof that I know what I'm doing. So, that's been very helpful for me and a lot of my clients. And then specifically for 2E kiddos, understanding that one's strengths do not undo one's differences or difficulties. We have this tendency to talk about 2E kids. They're so smart, but they have dyslexia, right? No. They're so smart and they're dyslexic. It's two parts of the same thing, right? Many brilliant people are dyslexic. It doesn't undo it, but when you start using the word "but" instead of "and," you're eroding the thing. So because I can't tell you how many meetings I sit in with schools. They're like, "Oh, he's incredible at math and science and technology and computers, but he's struggling in English." The lesson to that for the 2E kid is what you're good at doesn't matter because you're bad at this thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we got to help listen, you're crushing all these things and we're going to have to figure out how to make art class work for you. But that doesn't change the fact that you're crushing all these other things because those things are amazing.
Yeah, words matter. We were talking earlier about school and how I would fail music despite being a pretty accomplished musician already at that age. But I was getting straight A's in legal studies and social studies and English and all of that. But then they're like, yeah, but you fail. You're a failure. I didn't pass overall because I didn't pass these couple of things, even though I was great at that. And there was no attempt to encourage me or recognize the fact that I clearly could excel, like I was saying earlier, and try to figure out how to bring that into these other areas.
That's crazy.
I think the last couple of comments really tie into this last point, Will, which
okay.
sort of asking about, do you think early into
is this the one you're talking about?
Okay. Yeah. So if early intervention with neurodiverse kids can help later in life with imposter syndrome, it sort of ties into how
your friend's really throwing some good questions towards you, Dr. Matt.
She's sharp. She's going to keep all of us on our toes, right?
Good job. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sydney as well asked us the same sort of thing.
Yeah. I love that. I don't know yet. That's brilliant.
So I'll just show that. So that's what you're talking about there, Dr. Matt? Yeah. Right?
Right. We're all in developmental pathways, right? We're all moving in directions. And the coolest thing about life, as long as you are living, you can get better. Right. I mean, and we all have different ceilings at different skill sets, right? I'm never going to be a good singer ever. But I have worked hard enough to be competent at it. And that's probably as good as I'm ever going to be. But every time I give a talk, I get a little bit better at it. And I don't know what my ceiling is there. And that's really exciting. Right. But the idea of early intervention, which is why it's so important. Ties really nicely into gifted education writ large, is one of the things that fuels imposter syndrome is a lack of meaningful challenge. Because if you're skating by and you're not trying, that's that difference, right? There's that idea of, wait a second, everybody else is working their butts off and I'm not. What's different about me? I'm different again.
Yeah.
But if you put somebody in a situation where they have to be challenged, right? Now things are getting normalized. Why do you think, rugby clubs, soccer clubs, basketball academies have these academies. They want to bring people up and train them against real meaningful challenge, because what that does is it normalizes the experience of imposter syndrome too. We all feel like frauds, guys, because we're being thrown into the wolves, right? But it's this idea of, okay, but we're doing it. We are escalating the amount of challenge through early intervention, and it's normalizing failure, it's normalizing struggle, it's normalizing anxiety. So those things can't really build a toehold later in life, because you've spent your life with meaningful challenge. And you know that your worth as a human is not tied to getting that 100 on a test.
Yeah, I always found it strange how like CEOs could, or tech entrepreneurs could come out and go, failure is a part of success. I failed heaps, and people would be so surprised by that, and they would drop it like it was some epic piece of knowledge. I'm like, everyone should know this. This should be,
Well, and you know what else is interesting? It's talking about the basketball academies and football and all that. Now think about like I follow the NFL, for I'm an Australian, and I follow like the NFL, like stuff like that. I find it quite interesting, and I really get into like the draft and all that type of stuff there, right? But it's actually been really interesting. I look at a lot of the players who. So what was the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers? That Brock Purdy?
Yeah, Purdy, yep.
Now, that dude was the last of the draft, right? And that kid's just been coming out, blitzing it all year. Tom Brady, he was like one of the last people to come out of the draft as well. And then these people are just going on to these amazing careers. And you would think that and even with Brock Purdy, they almost, it seems like when you're the last person picked in the draft, they make like a mockery of that person, like Mr. Irrelevant and all this type of stuff. Wouldn't that play such a huge role in breaking that person down, you would think? But these people have actually obviously been able to battle through adversity there and go on and build these great careers.
Well, it's a great, I often say to people that failure doesn't define us, it refines us. We can't change what happens to us, but we can change how we respond to it. And anytime you take a committed action, it is a direct strike against imposter syndrome. Because imposter syndrome, like any anxiety disorder, wants you to stay still. It wants you to not move or move the wrong direction. Any committed action you take, you're Brock Purdy. Nobody would have blamed Brock Purdy for like saying, thanks for the free truck, and then retiring.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody had made it from where he was to where he is. But then you think about it, the other way to see that situation is you got nothing to lose. You go up there and you speak in the same bill as Tony Abbott. Well, you're probably never going to be as good as them.
Tony Abbott was like the prime minister of Australia, and he wasn't very well liked either.
So many words, so many names, right?
Yeah,
and that's
totally.
right. So you're never going to probably be as good as him. But if you don't give yourself the chance to play in that same sandbox, you don't know how good you can be. So really, the way to see it is bottom-up thinking. If I do nothing, nothing changes, right? And if I fail, I'm still on the bottom floor.
Yeah, such a good way.
Gains I get are moving in the direction of whatever my dreams might be. So,
and
really,
totally. And it's such a different thing from, say, the people who are picked number one or in the first round of the draft, who then go into this with everyone saying how great this person is, and then you're finding that a lot of those people are failing miserably because they've always been told that, hey, look, you're fantastic, but they're then not able to cut it. It's just crazy how it works. Look, I think we've there's so many people coming through with so many great things, and I think, I'd love to be able to go over everything, but we might have to call it a day there. Foodon John, did you have any last words that you wanted to say to Dr. Matt?
So I just thank you. This is one of the best chats we've had.
Yeah, this has been really cool. We've had some really cool people coming through. So, Dr. Matt, thank you so much. Now, you're doing some fantastic stuff out there, Dr. Matt. Where can people connect with you? Where can they find your work? You tell us.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a really awesome Facebook group, facebook.com/Dr. Matt Zakreski. We have a lot of really good stuff on there. And, I mean, I am often giving talks. Most of them are here in the United States, or I'm going to Canada soon. So they're, I guess, North America. I will speak to the entire continent of Australia, though. It is my life goal to return. So if anybody is looking for a speaker in giftedness of neurodivergence, you send me an email.
Man, that could be something we could try and work out in the future. Definitely,
because
no COVID here, mate.
Yeah.
We were locked down for that bloody long.
That makes me so happy.
All good. But no, mate, I think thank you so much for coming on today. We've still got comments coming through. So thank you so much for coming on today. If you are listening, please connect with Dr. Matt. He's got some really cool stuff. And like we spoke about before, there's so many other topics that you sent through to us, and we'd love to have you come back on. And, because I just feel like this is just a chat, we're just like,
it feels so normal and natural.
Yeah, it does. We're just having a little bit of a chat here. Yeah. Maybe next time, we could send you over some Carlton Draft there or Carlton Dry, and we could have a few beers because it's the evening where you are, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's lunchtime where we are.
Yeah,
so, but lunchtime on a Friday, so
on a Friday. So if lunchtime on a Friday in Australia, that's just normal. Prime drinking time or weather. Yeah. We drink rain, hail, or shine here, but yeah, Dr. Matt, thank you so much for coming on today. Yeah, we really appreciate it, mate.
It was a real treat, and I'm lucky enough to get to a lot of these, but I mean, this felt so. I really felt like I was just talking with two friends, and
yeah, totally.
If some people got some good stuff from this, then we've done our jobs, and I think there's a lot of stuff we can talk about. So I'll just start counting the days until
the next one, my man.
Or until that Qantas ticket shows up, right?
Yeah. We'll sort of. But look, we do want to get some events with some good people and all of that. So, if we can sort some stuff out in the future, yeah, we'd love to have you down under, mate. Hopefully that doesn't give you a bit of the blood won't rush to your head because you'll be underneath the earth here, but it'll be all good, mate. So thank you so much for coming on. Now, for anyone listening, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, follow our social media platforms, so our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn. Also, please check us out at the openheartedsociety.com, where you can check out all the cool work we're doing and connect with our podcast. And if you want to listen to this back on podcast, we're available on all platforms. My name's Will Wheeler with my main man, Photon John, Dr. Matt. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, everyone.